I'm very excited to bring you all Coriolis. We're going to be running this in the podcast. Of course, keep in mind that we are generally about 2 months ahead now in terms of what we're talking about on the podcast and what we're actively doing right now. It creates a little bit of dissonance for us, particularly we want to talk about these things, right? So this is, the YouTube channel is not really necessarily a correlation, direct correlation to what goes on and what gets released on the podcast, but it does give you a little sense of how we think about these things, how we approach these things, a little bit of actual play, a little bit of hands on development, and bringing, ultimately all of the tools that we're talking about in the podcast to you in a really direct, authentic way, right? Because I do not have the time to edit video. It's never going to happen. And if I want to get this stuff out to you, then you just get to see all of the, raw potential that goes on at modernmythology.net. So, Coriolis. This game is by Freely Publishing. It's absolutely beautiful as we go through it. It is basically imagine science fiction through the lens, Middle Eastern lens, instead of a European lens, as much as it very much is space opera. Don't get me wrong. Not a lot of hard science going on here. Very, very story driven, and has a lot of really interesting tones that we, see in other pieces like most famously now Dune, right? But a lot of religion, a lot of history and backstory, a lot of lore. Um, so, without further ado, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about not only what Coriolis does, but sort of my process and how I approach a game system, and how I might develop it for it. In this case, I'm going to develop 3 scenes for my buddies. We're going to do an actual play. And, by and large, is going to be a little different than my normal process because it's only going to be 3 scenes. And I want to highlight some of the pieces of Coriolis that maybe you could bring into your game or ideas that Coriolis is bringing in from other games. Now, probably the most important piece of this equation is this page right here. This is page 340 to 341, and it's your job as the GM. First off, it shows the principles of the game. Culture is everything. The mission fuels the story. Their spaceship is their heart. Factions rule the horizon. Space is full of mysteries, and the supernatural is real. So these are ideas that I definitely want to fold into the narrative and make certain that they hit home. One of the other things they talk about is beginnings and endings, which is, of course, really, this is very, very scene driven. It tells basically the GM that you should have some sort of sense of where each scene is going to begin and end. And we're going to be doing that. There's a lot of great ideas here in terms of like timing, using levels of success and failure, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and and how much you want to zoom in and out and some pacing ideas. But this is really critical, is these ideas of what is your scene doing? It should be doing one of these things. Have some sort of purpose. Drive the story forward, show conflict, introduce or explore an NPC, create suspense or atmosphere, give the players some important piece of information, and expand on one of the principles of the game. Quite honestly, I take this to heart. Not only do all of my scenes have to have something like this, but it always is going to push on one of these principles. Now, when I'm doing this, I always start with a notebook, particularly for a campaign, not for one-shots. I basically have a book of one-shots, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a look into this. We're going to go kind of backwards here as we think about Coriolis. So the first thing you'll notice here, and yes, it is in the end, but don't worry about that. That's not really important to our conversation. This is where I have the principles right up front. Bring in Middle Eastern touch points. Earn, beer, status, spaceship parts. This is mission is everything. Spaceship is their heart, ship's character, used to create arcs and challenges. Factions rule the horizon. Bring in push and pull and scheming of factions. Space is full of mysteries, portal builders, emissaries, first come civilizations, and secrets. The supernatural is real. Special and frightening. Non-believers stick out. Pray, receive blessings, and signs against the darkness are all an important thing. Each scene should generally do these. I do have some notes here. Difficulty should reflect drama, not realism. Do have a sense of pluses and minuses based on a 3-act story structure. I do this a lot. You'll notice I'm doing a very similar thing when we talk about my development, my D&D campaign. Notes for Don. I have to create a name list by faction and sub-concept and create a look list as well so that I can pull in. That's a really great way when we look at NPCs that they have names that are appropriate, that when you hear them, maybe you can, people who are playing the game, that the players recognize, oh, that's a Samaritan, oh, that's a nomad, or whatever the case is, based on what they look like and what their names are. Also, so, we're going to do these three scenes, and obviously because it's a one-shot, and one-shots in general for conventions and things like that, XP is not the end-all and be-all of awards. We're going to talk about XP. We're going to talk about what I'm going to do with XP for this. It'll be a little bit different because we're only doing 3 scenes, right? Do we want that to be important? How do we want the players to engage with that? But there's other possible rewards. Talents, cybernetics, and bionics. That's an interesting idea to think about. Artifacts, gear, spaceship improvements, right? And the idea of their spaceship is your heart, and of course beer, which is funny that it is the name of the currency here. This is just a look at, let's see here, what was I talking about here? Here's some of the Zenithian factions, first come factions, so I could get a sense of like who might be doing the pushing and pulling here. Some really good, like down to earth, no pun intended, daily life ideas, watches, when do the prayers happen, transactor tags, which is their credit system, cycles, also outside larger domes, temples, or chapels, rows of traders selling myrrh, tabak, or alabarum and incense sticks. So that's really kind of fun. Customary to hire mourners, right? That's a really interesting idea, okay? We have some ideas that I took for, which we'll talk about in just a bit. And then this was an adventure that I created. So I've created 2 scenarios thus far. Now, I will say, and breaking the rules a little bit, they do suggest that you work on scenes based on events and encounters, not necessarily on locales. Although I did want to sort of create this fun old installation that they were going to explore, and talk a little bit about that. And what I did is so the icons are a big part of this game. There are icons. We have, these are actually the symbols of the icons. We have the Lady of Tears, the Traveler, the Gambler, the Judge, the Dancer, the Merchant, the Messenger, and the Faceless. Now, this is where a lot of GMs sort of depart from me. I generally try to do an 8-scene structure. A lot of people are like, look, I'm only going to do 4 scenes. You'll hear me on the podcast complain all the time how people kind of ramble and don't really get to it. And generally, I'm all about, where's the conflict? What are we doing here? And, what are we getting out of this scene? Ultimately, what are the dice telling us? How are we moving forward? How are we changing? And, I'm perfectly happy if some of that happens in a conversation. But by and large, I really want to get an idea of what we're doing and why we're doing it, right? I want to tell this story. I want this to be a film or a show. So what I did here is I split this up in each of the icons, which are kind of the gods, right? They're archetypes. But again, supernatural is real. The characters get their prayers answered and such like that all of the time. In fact, this group of people I decided are going to be pilgrims. We'll talk about that in a bit. We also have, I really want to bring those things in. So not only do I talk about what is that icon about, what their symbol is, but I also talk about what their sacrifices are. And, I want to bring this into the players so they know, what are they going to have on them? Or when they see something, do they recognize which icon was brought in? And then I'm going to tie, or at least in this one, I tied each of the icons to one of the scenes. And that is very important because a icon is associated with a particular skill. So when you pray to an icon in this game, it's to help with a particular skill. The Traveler is not going to help you with melee combat. The Messenger is not going to help you with, observation, and so on and so forth. So each scene, I know what's going on in those scenes, and then each scene I know what the icon is. Sometimes what I'll do is there is an icon deck. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll do draws. Sometimes they're stacked, sometimes they're not. You never know. But this is a fun option to stack the deck and create some sort of sense of, like, pacing wise, scene 1, and you turn over the card, the Lady of Tears. Scene 2, you turn over the card, you see the Traveler. Scene 3, you turn over the card, you see the Gambler. And then that hopefully really helps the players get a sense, especially as they learn more and more about these things, it allows the players to get a sense of what the setting is like and what the feel of the scene is going to be. I also make, copious setting notes, and, I kind of put everything in there but the kitchen sink. And then, my brain is going through, sometimes I'll highlight stuff, sometimes I won't. But this is just grist for the story mill, right? So now this is an old notebook. I actually used it for a few things. That is my new Coriolis notebook. And we're going to be looking into what are we looking at for these three scenes, right? So let's look in the book and let's see how the book really thinks about some of these things. First thing we're going to start with is what rules are we really focused on? So for a game like this, they have something called a group concept. However, we're not really going to lean into group concept because while there is going to be this brief summary of what's going on. There are a bunch of pilgrims. They've gone to this planet as part of this big pilgrimage. It's actually a company that's doing this pilgrimage tour. And so there's a little bit of cynicism there, even though this religious pursuit is very, very important to everybody. Here are a number of people who are capitalizing on the religious nature of the religious nature of the setting, and somehow some of the factions may or may not be into the idea of worshiping the icons. But so you have a number of these groups, and these groups have things like, what do the free traders concepts, what kind of concepts do they have, possible character concepts within that group. In this case, we are doing pilgrims. This is going throughout this little map. If we were to do a campaign and go area to area that has some of like the really big, the big religious sites based on a number of things, not only icon sites and prophet sites and things like that. There are these beings called the emissaries. Some people might want to visit them. But consequently, there's also these ancient monuments spread throughout the Third Horizon that people go to because they believe they have religious significance. Now, we're not looking at something like that, nor are we looking at debt. So you create your ship. You have a ship construction. We're not going to do that, even though the ship is your group's heart. This is going to be a scene on a planet with these two characters. They might have some sort of concept of a ship. I'll use a pre-generated one. I will say that this is one of the fun kind of, games within games. I'm a sucker for such things. You sit there and tell me that I get to build a stronghold, or I get to build my ship, or I get to have my own business. I mean, fuck the story. I'm just going to go and do that, and I'm perfectly happy. It's one of the things I actually really love about Ars Magica is this idea that you have these wonderful, grandiose ideas about how you're going to change the direction of magic and what crazy things are you going to do with your covenant and so on and so forth. But crap, I have to do all this political stuff, and the game forces you to be sort of like pulled away from those things. I love the idea of that possibly happening here. We also have patrons and nemeses for each of the groups. You'll see, for instance, pilgrims. You have a high priestess, a high general, a captain, commander of a bulk hauler, and so on and so forth. And they can be pre-baked in patrons and nemesis. Somebody who's helping you, somebody who's harming you. I actually had a campaign once where it was the same person, their patron and their nemesis. It was really fun. Again, we're not going to be dealing with that too much because it's a shorter form piece, but really great ways to bring in story and drive things forward. Particular debt in terms of, it's obviously a game that wants you to think about debt, right? I mean, some of your stories won't, but it definitely gives you a sense of being able to, we're going here, we're going to make some beer, we're going to do some other things, we're going to look for some cash. Famous line from Blade is, we're not exactly the March of Dimes, right? We're not a charity. We need to figure out a way to feed ourselves and feed our ship. So what we are going to do is, and we're not going to make the characters today. I have two in mind for this scenario. But what I want to point out is some of the really important pieces here. The first is something called a personal problem. You have history. You have been through something before the beginning of the game that still haunts or threatens you. Really big piece baked right into the rules. Every one of these archetypes that we're going to look at actually has a number of problems you can select from. Certainly you could create more problems. However, doing so, there is a piece that gains you rewards and such like that. Also, relationships are baked in. You have a couple of selections based upon your archetype, and you then, would tie one or more of the characters in with that relationship. This is fun. When you've chosen your relationships to the other PCs, you should pick one of them as your buddy, your best friend in the group. Check the box next to that person on your character sheet. I'm also sort of wondering whether or not, if I want to make for this 2-person, 3-scene game, whether or not I want to make them each other's buddies, or if I want to have a third PC or NPC PC that could there conceivably be some sort of like triangle going on there? We'll see if that really matters or if that would take up too much time. There are the 9 icons. Each character is aligned to a icon, and then as you saw, those icons are aligned to that character, to skills. I want to note that is a role. So there are a lot of roles here that you can do to develop these characters. That brings us to experience and advancement. So let me just go over these real quick. At the end of each session, you go through this. Did you participate in the session? Did you overcome a difficult challenge or help your crew to reach a current goal? Did you put yourself and your crew at risk because of your personal problems? Did you learn something new about yourself and another PC? My favorite. Did you sacrifice or risk something for your PC buddy? Did you act in accordance to your icon? So there's a possible 6 XP that you could get at the end of this scenario. You will notice it, of course, has nothing to do with, defeating creatures or facing, although that could be a serious challenge. It has everything to do with how the story is intersecting with these characters. So we're going to really focus on those. What I'm thinking of doing here is, while I'll do participation at the end, I will probably have these 5 I might give at the end of a scene. I won't give more than 6 for the whole session, but I will probably dole these out as necessary. Now, keep in mind also that these are ideas the GM. This is also a directive, right? The GM has to give opportunities for the players to do this. If you don't give them difficult challenges, then they can't face difficult challenges. If you don't put some of their personal problems in front of them, then it's often hard to engage with those things. Learn is something probably they can do themselves, part of the success-failure system. So that, there's a lot of great stuff in here that I think I'm going to try to bake into the game. So we're going to be really leaning heavily as we do. If you don't know by now, I'm big into reward systems and how the game supports them. These are the character archetypes. This is how you make characters. You go through, they get certain skills and such like that. We're going to do the fugitive. Whoops, I passed it. We're going to do the fugitive. There he is. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I want to do mystic or revolutionary. I haven't decided yet. Personal problems. I believe I'm going to do a group of zealous icon believers are on your trail and they know about your power. So I might have a mystic going on there. Then the trailblazer. This is going to be, I'm thinking maybe a colonist, but I really love this problem. You're possessed by something from the dark between the stars. It sometimes takes over, giving you seizures or memory loss. I think that's really evocative, so I'm definitely going to use the Trailblazer for the second character. Now, just in terms of the basics of the game, first off, you have this sense of praying to the icons. That is important because it ostensibly gives you a reroll. So a really, really powerful tool to sort of bring in the evocative or religious nature of this setting. And people who don't engage with the icons clearly are going to be less successful. Or if you do and you're sort of shunned, then we can sort of like bake that into the system. It's sort of like the Simpsons when Bart Simpson sells his soul to the devil and, doors don't open for him anymore. It's really kind of fun. This system, of course, one of the many things that I love about it is that while you roll a die pool, you all should know by now I love die pool systems. We're not going to be spending successes to do various things in this. I want to kind of stick as close to the basics as I can, not add too much to it. But it does have a level of success system where 1/6 is a limited success. Ostensibly, you think of that as partial successes or mixed successes in a lot of other games where basically yes and or no but or yes but I don't know. The GM basically gives some sort of complication to whatever your success is. And then you have success and failure. And each of the skills, it's actually baked into the skill system. So you have failure, your opponent refuses to listen and won't accept your demands. Limited success, your opponent must make a choice. Either do what you want or attack you physically right now. I love that. Critical success, your opponent is moved by the strength of your personality and thus accepts your demands without asking for anything. That's multiple successes. And each of the skills has something to that effect. Now, when you pray to the icons, this is where we start looking at some of the notes that I often will provide to players. When you pray to the icons, you give the GM a darkness point. And here are some of the things that darkness points can do. If I can, where'd they go? There it is. So, YouTube creation at its finest, right? Just looking through my notes here to see where, there it is. Okay. So here are some of the ways a GM receives darkness points. The PC performs a portal jump without being in stasis. We'll talk about portal jumps in a minute. PC suffers a bad stasis after a portal jump. PC prays to the icons for a reroll, and the PC activates a mystical power. PCs get experience based on, or if the PCs do certain things. So if they witness an unnatural event, if they suffer torture someone, trigger warning, kill someone other than enemies in a fight. So clearly, the players give the GM darkness points if they do shit that's, kind of beyond the pale and clearly makes them bad guys. So that's and there's just some other pieces in terms of travel that will get darkness points that we won't deal with in this game. So what are darkness points used for? First off, the darkness points, the GM can say empty a PC clip, so the weapon must be loaded. And then there's various costs for different things. Misfires, losing possessions, innocent NPCs are in danger. It's basically like hard moves in a lot of, say, Powered by the Apocalypse things. And it's this great economy where, you want to succeed, but how much do you want to succeed? And do you want to, we see a lot of these games that I play, and I put that pile of darkness points in a little bowl right in front of me, and so players watch that build and accumulate. And then I will, spend it. Negate 1/6 from a roll, -2 from an environmental danger. PC gets temporary dark madness. Oh goodness, that's fantastic stuff. And also you could do things like boost non-player characters and break ship systems, particularly while they're in the middle of some combat. So darkness points is definitely a piece of the system that we're going to engage with. Let's see here. The last thing I really want to talk about, of course, there's a whole piece in here of gear. And this is great because it's really evocative. You can, clothing and culture are the ways that you bring across the really interesting piece, and to some level, there's some exoticism going on. They refer to the game as like Arabian Nights in space. I'm not certain if that's sort of like, reductive in any way, but I just love their efforts to really make the setting unique and interesting, and not the same old. One of the things, and unfortunately we're really not going to hit on it too much, I don't think, maybe we'll talk about it a little, is portal jumps. So whenever you portal jump, maybe I'll do a flashback scene to a portal jump or something to that effect, but whenever you jump, first off, you have to be in a stasis chamber. Portal jumps can happen sort of instantaneously. Sometimes they can take some time. Sometimes your character is going to have dreams. Certainly there's going to be bad things are going to happen in the world if you're not in a stasis tube when it happens. You certainly could have some really fun thing where in a campaign where something happens on the ship just as you're about to jump. Maybe maybe somebody attacks, somebody's in the ship, maybe alarms go off or whatever the case is, and maybe the crew has to find a way to get to the engines or get to the bridge to basically shut things down and maybe stop the group from jumping. Maybe they wake up in the middle of a jump for some reason. Certainly this is, your players should be holding their breath if there is a pile of darkness points before they get to a portal, right? Bad things happen out in space. Space is really big, and this is space opera, but there's a lot of time that happens. You've probably have several scenes going on whenever you're going to have something going on in space. There's this very elaborate set of ship-to-ship combat rules They actually have somebody's produced cards. I believe Free Leagues produce cards for them that you can get in Drive-Through RPG, and and so on and so forth. So what are we doing here? And then of course Beasties, definite. Definite like cross between various alien cultures and some Lovecraftian ideas. So what are we going to do here? I've talked to you about it. I really thought about this and how are we going to manage this. First off, we talked about what I'm going to be doing is looking at the collision of personal problems and the darkness between the stars, right? We're going to have their two personal problems be up front and center. They're going to be hunted by a group of zealots, very, very dangerous people, probably a bunch of Samaritan soldiers, very high-tech gear, something to that effect, and then possessed by something. The Trailblazer has something or someone within. And in order to have that happen, I'm going to have them visit a great observatory, an old pilgrim site for a prophet, and maybe they go and they're exploring this place. It's no longer working. However, I do have 3 scenes, so we're thinking about events and encounters, where it will start and an end, and I have 3 scenes written down here. First is pinned down. So we're going to jump right in where they are pinned down in some sort of hallway or something like that by said zealots. How is that going to pan out? And the idea is not that they wouldn't escape or they would get captured. Of course, the players don't know that. But of course, on failures or limited successes, I would allow them to escape but wounded, right? Or, various, if not wounded, scarred in some way, ultimately affected the moves, but can get out of there. The next scene is as they're getting pushed into the observatory's interior, they come to the main room where they discover a sacrificial chamber. This is going to challenge a serious question if the Trailblazer is going to turn on the fugitive. This I see is a possible moment where the Trailblazers, internal entity may come to the fore, recognize the value of this sacrificial chamber, and maybe decide that the fugitive might be the sacrifice. So there'll be some interplayer, but really it's not interplayer because basically the idea here is that the internal entities is the obstacle, right? And so you'll have the 2 players really working together to save the fugitive. Just one is an internal fight and the other is an external fight. Then the last is the summoning. After this big crisis is over, however that kind of pans out and we close the scene, we find this obvious march of cultists. The cultists will surprisingly be the various pilgrims, being led by likely some sort of pilgrim leader that was part of this ship's whole thing. And do they let it continue? What are the stakes? Can they get rid of the creature within the Trailblazer, but at what cost? Do they make this personal, or do they try to save the day, right? Becomes what's going on there. And I think those 3 scenes are really going to help the viewers and my fellow players understand, the core of Coriolis. So that's what I got for you today. You'll see how all of this pans out ultimately in the actual session. I will, certainly link this in various areas when that gets released. Again, it's probably not going to get released for another, 2 to 3 months. when we actually do the Coriolis scenario. But, hopefully when that happens, you'll tune in and have a sense of what's going on. Thanks so much and for joining the conversation.